The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes with Plein Air and Fine Art Connoisseur magazines. One of the essentials of learning art is to draw from life. If you can draw from the human figure, it's so important. It helps you get your hand-eye coordination, makes you better. I saw the drawings of Daniel Maidman and I went nuts because they're so delicate, so sensitive, and so beautiful. So I asked Daniel to do a video. We're going to share that with you right now.
Hey, my name is Daniel Maidman, and I am here today to talk with you about life drawing and to demonstrate a few techniques for you that will hopefully be helpful for you going forward. So before we start, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm an artist. I live in New York. I'm also an art critic, and my background is that I have been life drawing in a very serious way since 1998. So as of the date of this filming, we're talking about 21 years of life drawing. I'm largely self-educated. What happened was that I started out wanting to be a film guy, and that didn't really work out, and when I realized that it wasn't going to work out, my impulse toward film, which was a synthesis of visual and verbal inspiration, broke back apart into visual components and verbal components. So I have done a lot of writing since then, and I've got art criticism published all over the place. You can check the archives of Huffington Post, White Hot Contemporary Art, Blue Review, any number of other places. And I've also become a professional artist. I'm a very figurative-oriented artist, and so my work over the past couple decades has involved hundreds or thousands of life drawings and a lot of figurative painting. Because I'm self-taught, I went on a very long and circuitous path. There are things that other artists know how to do that I don't know how to do, but I have a great deal of, I guess, moral satisfaction with what I do know how to do because I know that I earned it myself. So it took me a long time and I took a lot of wrong turns, but they're all mine. My understanding of life drawing came from studying great artists. It came from endless practice. I also spent 2 years dissecting cadavers through Santa Monica College in Los Angeles and drawing an anatomical atlas on the basis of that investigation. And more recently, some work from photo reference as well. So today we are going to work with two wonderful models, Alyssa and Demetrius. We're going to explore short poses and long poses and what you put into and what you get out of each of them. We're going to talk about when to use your understanding of anatomy and when to set it aside in the interests of making artwork. We're going to discuss light. We're going to discuss how you see what you see. We're going to discuss the tricks that your brain plays on you. And we're going to look at the media that are my favorites, which are a light pencil and a dark pencil on toned paper. I'm really excited to share all of this with you, so let's get started. Okay, so what do we mean by visual cognition? Each one of us has a unique way of looking at the world, and until you've trained yourself in drawing and painting through attentive looking at things, you won't be able to tell how you see things. Let me tell you a story that'll help make it clear. When I was a little kid, I met up with a child psychologist who presented me with a challenge. She gave me a line art drawing of a Celtic knot, and she said, "I'd like you to make a copy of this drawing." And she started a timer. So I started making a copy of the drawing. And what I did was I looked at each individual closed shape in the drawing. I didn't look at the knot overall. And I reproduced each individual shape. And each shape was simple, even though the Celtic knot overall was complex. And I got done with it. She stopped the timer and she said, "I've never seen anyone copy it that quickly." And I thought I was cheating because I never saw the Celtic knot. All I saw were the individual shapes. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I understood that in art there really is no cheating. There are only ways that you find out who you are. What I found out that day was that I see shapes. I see the simplest possible subshapes inside of the overall shape of whatever object I'm looking at. And once I embraced that fundamental quality of my own way of seeing, I was able to begin to build a skill set on the basis of the way that my brain works for looking at things. That is not by any means a universal way of seeing things. Some people see the essential form, the weight, the mass of the form, and they have to build up from form. Other people see lines of motion going through a form, and they have to build on the basis of those lines of motion. There are lots and lots of different ways of seeing, and in each of those ways there are sub-ways of seeing. So in this video today, I'm going to be showing you my techniques, and my techniques are optimized for how I see. So unless you see exactly like me, these techniques will not be perfect for you. And you should keep that in mind. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. Try out the stuff that I'm showing you and enjoy it. But remember, the art of life drawing is an art that takes many years to develop. And part of that development is a process of self-analysis. So you will lay bare how you see as you practice it. You'll notice certain biases and tendencies and try to make yourself aware of these subliminal habits of yours. Because the more you can understand what you're doing, the more you can respond to that and develop a set of tools that is unique to your vision as an artist. All right, let's talk about some of the tools we're going to be using today. I always use a 3B pencil, and because the 3B pencil gets short, I use a pencil extender. I actually these days use a pencil extender even when my pencil is still really long because I got used to that counterweighted feeling. I like having that weight behind me. I just got adjusted to it over a number of years. You might not. Either way is fine, but it will definitely save you some money when your pencils start to get really short. For my light values, I use a white pencil, also with a pencil extender. Why am I using a white pencil? Because I am using tan paper and gray paper. One point of this demonstration is to show you what happens when you're life drawing on toned paper. So we need a dark and a light. For the gray paper, which is darker, I also use a black pencil. And I use the black pencil also for my short pose drawings, which I make on white heavyweight printmaking paper. I love this paper. It tears right out of the sketchbook. And then you have little drawings that they're just beautiful little records of what you did in a life drawing session. They make fabulous presents. So I recommend that. I also use a click eraser. Click eraser gives you a reasonably high resolution point for erasing, but it gets dirty. So I also tend to have a fairly high friction surface where I can clean off the eraser between erasings, then I get a nice white area so I'm not muddying up the paper when I use the eraser. The eraser only works really well on graphite. It does not work on the white and the black. So to some extent, you are making irreversible choices when you draw on this paper with these pencils. And we'll get into more detail about it later on, just so you know. It took me a long time to find a pencil sharpener that works with these pencils. They tend to, they've got a soft core, which tends to snap in a lot of pencil sharpeners. These work pretty well for me. They've stopped making them, so I'm in trouble when this one gets dull. But I will search around until I find another sharpener that works for them. I've never liked using a blade to sharpen my pencils. Those are the materials we're going to be using today. It's a pretty basic tool set, but you can do some pretty amazing things with it, and I'm looking forward to showing you. All right, let's see how these tools work now. The paper that I use has a moderate amount of tooth. You can get really nicely textured papers, but a priority for me is that the character of the lines comes from the decisions that I make with my pencil, as opposed to decisions that the paper makes for me with its texture. Seurat really loved the texture of his paper. It gave him pointillism from the paper when he was drawing with charcoal. So that's an option for you. It's not an option that I find useful for what I want to do. So I tend to use relatively smooth toothed papers. I'm going to show you the basics of using dark and light on a medium tone paper. I'm holding a 2B pencil. I still have a bunch of these in my pencil case. I used to use 2Bs all the time. I switched to 3B because I wanted to have a darkness range that was a little bit deeper while being able to maintain my lights. So now I've got a 3B pencil loaded up. I'm going to sharpen it a little bit because it's a bit dull. I don't like to over sharpen my graphite pencils because then I have a really delicate tip that I need to snap off and it makes a little mark on the paper. I like the sharpest tip I can get on a white pencil because you can get really subtle depiction of form. Let me show you. Okay, we're going to start with just a simple shape, right? Circle, I'm going to shade back. This is not all that exciting, but that's life for you. Just showing what these do. Okay, starting with a sphere. Now, this is a sort of a reduced dynamic range version of the sphere that you would get on white paper. The magic of toned paper is that you can then do this. And in a very efficient way, without having to be all finicky about the middle values, you can get a very high character highlight. Got like a little point highlight there, a glow around it, and it just looks beautiful. A monkey could make beautiful work with toned paper. It's great. So this is the basic capability of what this paper does. Some things that I'd like to warn you about. If you mix the graphite and the white, you'll get a very awkward cold middle tone. It can't be erased. It cannot be reliably reproduced. I find it almost impossible to work with. When I'm teaching workshops, I always tell my students there are no wrong choices in art, but there are choices that are difficult to work with. I find this choice very difficult to work with. I would recommend that you stay away from it because you don't get these beautifully distinguished darks and lights. Now, the fact that we're separating our darks and lights here means that we have an expressive language that we can pursue. Let's say I have a light source coming from here, a little bit of dimmer light coming from here. So lots of light, a little bit of light. This is an ordinary situation. This is going to be a cylinder. So let's say that the terminator, the line where the light sources end and you get a real darkness, is right here, right? So this is going to be the darkest dark on our cylinder. Now, you're going to know the rule from art class that the lightest light in your filled shadow area should not be as bright as any of the area in your directly lit area. Yeah, it's a rule. You don't have to follow it exactly. But what you can do is make the choice that you're only going to use your white in this area here, right? So you can drop down to pure paper here. And once you have defined this for the viewer as the area that's going to have the white pencil on it, it will all read brighter than this area here. So what you have to do is define your brights here the way you would traditionally do on white paper, by means of defining the darks around them and leaving them light. And then you get to go up into your brightnesses here And that's part of the extreme expressivity that this set of media affords you. I'd like to show you a practical application of that principle in a drawing that I did from two light sources. So this is a life drawing of a wonderful model named Sarah, who I've been working with for several years in New York. I lit her with one relatively hard, bright light over here, and one relatively soft, dim light over here. So a few interesting qualities of life drawing and of the media come to the fore in this drawing. First of all, I'm not following the rule that I just sketched out to you, where you have light white only in one area, and then you use the value of the paper as your highlight in the other area. But I did something like it. I used a soft layering of the white over here and a relatively harder layering of the white over here. So the way that I use the white gives you an idea of the character of the light sources, the relative value and the relative hardness. So you have like very hard highlights along edges of her here, and you have relatively soft regions of brighter value over here. Additionally, and this is not directly apropos, but it's a terribly important principle, I paid a lot of attention to what's called the core, the area where the two light sources both fade off and you get the darkest dark. The eye and the brain are wired to understand form from the character of the core. So that means not only its shape, but its intensity. You see it's softer and more diffuse over here because the forms turn more slowly, but it's relatively harder and darker over here because these are areas where the forms turn sharply. I've been able to cue the viewer to understand all of those volumes by means of careful attention to the core. And that kind of careful attention to the core in the context of really beautiful light to either side is another one of the qualities of using toned paper. All right, now we've looked at tan paper. We're going to look at gray paper next because gray paper has a different set of qualities. The gray paper that I use, which is listed as gunmetal gray in the catalog, is a darker value than the tan paper. It gives you a different set of opportunities and a different set of restrictions. What I like to do, because as we've said, the white and the black pencils do not erase very well. So when I'm laying out a drawing on gray paper, I start in graphite. The problem is, I can hardly see what I'm drawing. I'm doing it a little darker here for the camera, but overall you get a very silvery look because the graphite is just about the same value as the paper unless you're pressing really hard. So again, we start with a circle. Once I've got a sketch that I like, then I will go in my much less reversible black pencil, and I'll follow only the lines that I like. And I'll just either erase the lines that I don't like or leave them, because it doesn't have to be perfect. You are using the black pencil instead of the graphite to establish your dark values. You got to work harder because that paper sucks up a lot of value before you start to move into real darks and real lights. But you'll notice because of the smoother tooth, I can get a much smoother field of value. So instead of building up a picture on the basis of individual lines having a pleasing character, with the gray paper, I tend to build up a drawing on the basis of regions of value have a pleasing character. It's a different challenge. So we've got a nice black area there, and then we get a nice white area here. And you'll see almost immediately that the whites are kind of exciting because the darks are so much darker. It's very appealing. It won't do all the work for you. You're using a very charismatic set of media, but you still have to learn how to draw well. So that's what we're doing today. Starting anyway. So, we're building up density of this white waxy pencil on the very absorbent gray surface. Now, here's something you can do on the gray paper that you can't do on the tan paper with the tools that I'm describing. The two types of pencil can successfully interact with one another. You still get a cooler value, but the overall value of the paper is cooler. And the pencils are more compatible because they're both pigment and wax, or whatever this stuff is. Look, I'm not a technician. I assume it's waxy because it feels waxy. But they work happily together in a way that the graphite and the white do not work happily together. So you've got a little bit more wiggle room. You also have a little bit more wiggle room in another way. As opposed to the tan paper, which is rougher, this paper will accept more erasure of your darks and your lights. You can't completely cover up any mistakes, but you can make more mistakes and hide them better later, especially because those pencils mix with each other. So, two similar but different sets of media, resulting in two different sets of challenges and opportunities. We're going to apply these to life drawing next. All right, so we've taken a look at what our tools do, and we're going to step back from that and work on white paper with a black pencil for a little while. This video is designed around your needs as an artist when you hire a model privately. And even though that time is very expensive, I cannot recommend enough limbering up with your model session the same way you would do at a gym. The thing that I found over time works great for me is short poses. So we're going to do 20 minutes of short poses, and we'll talk about the utility of short poses while we're doing it. Our model today is Alyssa. Thank you for coming in.
Of course, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
And I'm going to set a timer for 20, and every time we finish a pose, or I finish drawing a pose, I'll yell switch, and they're all going to be ones and twos.
Sounds great.
Okay. In case you guys are wondering what a 1 or 2 is, that is a 1 minute or 2 minute pose. And the whole idea here is to maintain a quick pace and not to get too fussy with it. So we are going to be doing 1 and 2 minute poses throughout. Let's start with the first one.
All right.
Okay. So you'll see here, I am not going for perfection. What I am doing here has 2 goals. One of them is to get to know my model. I've never worked with her before. I don't know what her shape is. I don't know what she likes to do. I don't know dynamic poses.
Yes.
And you can't really do those with a long pose. So this is a good opportunity for the model to follow what inspires her as a model. So I will gradually get ideas. I will get ideas for longer poses in an ordinary setting from doing some work on short poses to start with, leaving it up to the model entirely to define the poses for this sequence. Switch. Gives you an idea of the model's native tendencies, and that helps you to draw inspiration from who your model is as a specific individual and not an overall representative of the human species. We are not drawing ideas here, we are drawing people. The other useful thing about this is that these are basically like low-cost drawings, like emotional cost. You're working on smaller paper, you're not working for such a long time. It helps you give yourself permission to fail. And without permission to fail, you cannot make progress as an artist. Switch. So this should be a process of play and discovery for you, because if you have this model session scheduled and you're thinking of doing a longer pose later, you're going to have a lot of anxiety and expectation invested in that longer pose. If you screw up the longer pose, you've basically screwed up your expensive private session, you've lost the time. It's just disappointing when you put more resources into something and it doesn't work out. So here, it doesn't matter if it works out. You just do something fun, and it raises your energy level. It helps the model get to know you as well. And you wind up with all these nifty little drawings out of it. Now, I experimented with a lot of these sort of media for drawings I didn't care that much about before I settled on this combination, which I find very satisfying. I love this heavy paper. I love the black pencil. I love the casual lines that it gives me permission to do. Switch. But you might want to play around with different things. This is a time to play around, to discover new things. Just because you have hired a model doesn't mean that it's time to stop trying new things. So this is how I do it. But you should find your mix of media that excites you. I spent years and years going through different media. It was extraordinarily rewarding. It challenged my creativity in different ways. And I came up with the things that I mostly use now, but I still assign myself challenges and changes in what I'm doing so that I won't get complacent and so that I won't wind up sort of deadening the artwork that I'm making. So I recommend that you have these general allocations of little bits of time and energy and materials to doing things that are designed not necessarily to fail, but in which you don't have an investment for success. Also, when they turn out nice, they make fantastic gifts, as I was talking about before. It's really nice to make things for people that you care about instead of just buying things for them. So I like to give these to friends and family or mail them to other people. Notice how terribly I'm doing the head here. I don't care. I'm getting it out of my system. Switch. All right. Now what we are learning about Alyssa here is that she is not kidding about liking to do dynamic poses. A lot of these have a lot of torsion, a lot of diagonals. What's your background in movement, Alyssa?
So I am a professional dancer, classically trained in ballet, and then I've sort of shifted into the more contemporary world, still very classically based. That's actually how I got into modeling. The owner of a print shop here in Austin, Texas, saw my dance work and also some of my commercial modeling work, and he said
Switch.
that your dance background would mean that you're strong enough to do, life modeling. And I kind of laughed and was like, what do you mean strong enough? I sit and stand still. That's nothing. And then the first time I ever did it, it was like, oh my goodness, this is a lot of work to do to stay in one position. It's been quite a journey the past 3 years working to kind of hone this craft. But I think my favorite part about being a model, especially in the life drawing sector, is bringing my dance background into the studio. So it allows me to sort of bring in, like you said, torsion, lots of twists, and especially with these quick poses, I can get a little wild about it and really give some interesting twists and sharp angles and kind of, balancing positions that I just realistically couldn't do for 20 plus minutes.
Right.
So this is often my favorite part.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you have like most of the dancers that I've worked with have an experience when they first start modeling where it takes them a little while to realize that you can't hold the things that you can do in dance, because they don't realize that at the very beginning that that the dance stuff that they've been doing doesn't last more than a second or two. Yeah.
Yeah,
And they really
so-
torture themselves a little bit.
Yeah, so I was lucky in that I had done a lot of photography modeling before. And a lot of the photographers that I worked with were very interested in fine art photography. So I would contort into a pose
Switch.
and hold it for quite some time while the photographer moved around, found different ways to, you know, really kind of distort the image. And that already, even though that was no more than 5 minutes, kind of opened my eyes to, wow, humans don't like to stay still at all.
Right.
This is a challenge physically and mentally. And so when I got offered to life model, I definitely knew there'd be limitations in what I could do. The very first session was actually pretty rough. I got into a sitting pose that immediately cut circulation off to my leg, but I was very stubborn and would not come out of it. And I don't recommend that to any model. It was not worth it. And no artist has ever been cruel and been like, no, you must get back into that painful pose right now. That's never happened. But
Good.
it was a wonderful learning lesson, and since then I've
Switch.
been quite,
Can we do some back poses?
yeah, been
Great.
quite judicial about what I'm willing to do.
Right.
And then also, you know, I've been doing it for 3 years, so I know my body. I know that if I'm going to put weight in a certain spot, bad things will happen. So
Right.
I've learned how to distribute my weight uniquely for this task, which is different than for dance. But
Awesome.
yeah.
Huh. Okay. Switch. More back poses?
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course.
So you can see she is bringing a lot of energy to her modeling, and that is a gift that she is giving to the artists that she's working with, because it's the same as any performer audience relationship, and that goes back and forth when you're in a life modeling session, who's the performer and who's the audience, but they play off of one another, and she's bringing energy and creativity, and that means that it's easier for you to draw out energy and creativity. And that's an exciting thing to have happen with a model. When you are working with people privately, you are going to be establishing a closer working relationship with them than when you're working with them in a workshop. And things to look for are the ability to talk with somebody for a long time. You're going to spend a lot of time with this person, and you want them to be somebody that you like. Somebody that's inspiring also, is super important, but a lot of artists, when they first start out hiring models privately or selecting which models they're going to work with, kind of are stuck on a very narrow and classical set of ideas of attractiveness or of a type that they're looking for. And that ultimately winds up not being all that important. What is important is somebody that helps you make good art. And you can't predict that. It will never be your type. It's just something that you recognize when it happens. And you get that recognition, switch, from working over time with a lot of different models and beginning to recognize in yourself how you respond to models. So a whole bunch of this process of life drawing involves careful self-analysis. You're definitely analyzing what you're seeing in front of you, but you're spending at least as much time in the long run figuring out who you are and what makes you tick as an artist. And if you're not doing that, like, you don't have to do it in an explicit analytic way. I'm a very verbal person, and so I'm talking in a way that suggests that you want to write an essay about the issue. That's not really what I mean. You might have a more emotional or intuitive way of looking at it, but being conscious of it and making choices that reflect your goals as an artist and your capacities as an artist is very, very important. So keep in mind that that's part of your challenge going forward. I could do these all day. Switch.
Something else that I think I get to bring to the table is I am also an artist.
Oh.
So that's something I'm able to be very cognizant of when I'm modeling is, okay, like if this was going to be my warm-up, what are things that I would want? I'd want to see negative space. I'd want to see lots of, lines of action that are big curves across the page so that I could loosen up my hand. And so I think that also has helped me model, is thinking about, being on the other side.
Are you a figurative artist?
Vaguely, very loose. It is my hobby. Dance is definitely my career, and my art has been the only artistic aspect of my life that has remained non-career, and I plan to keep it that way for sure. Because
that's fantastic.
Yeah, because I do need something that I don't have that obligation to. But it is something that I love. My wife actually is wonderful at falling asleep in interesting positions. So I mostly draw her. And again, just like the photographers I worked with, I'll move around and find the weirdest, most difficult angle to draw and then fight with that. Yeah.
Awesome. You remind me of something that I wanted to tell our viewers, which is I dragged my wife to life drawing a few times when I was first starting because it was such a fascinating thing and it was so much fun. And she really enjoyed it, and she went a few times until she started wanting to get better at it. And then it stopped for serving its purpose, which was enjoyment and relaxation. And that's another distinction that that you want to figure out for yourself. Is this something that you're pursuing professionally? Is this something that you want to technically get better at? Or is this something that you're doing because you enjoy it? And if you're doing it because you enjoy it, then don't fuss about getting better at it. Just have fun. If you want to get technically better at it, then work at that. If you want to be a professional, you're going to have a whole host of other issues to work on that don't apply to someone who's doing it because they love it. So Alyssa here is doing it because she loves it, and she knows from her professional work in other arts the demands involved in making a career out of it. And has you've separated this out so that it's something that you can just be creative in. This is where you get to play without having to worry about what you're going to do with it afterwards.
And I've got to say, being a model for 3 years, especially in the university settings, I have gotten better from modeling. Because I get to listen in on instruction. It's kind of an awesome experience, and then that information sort of gradually seeps in, and it's been a way for me to grow without pressure.
That's great.
Yeah.
So the idea here is to clarify what you want out of it. Stay in that pose when I tear the paper. I'm going to do a different drawing of it. Something else going on here. So because this is, a video being distributed the way that it's being distributed, we're not doing frontal nudity in this at all, which is why we have sort of, what do you call what you're wearing?
I'd like to call it Strategic undergarments.
We have strategic undergarments on Alyssa. Ordinarily, we would, life drawing is completely nude, and there are good reasons for that. You want to be able to understand the figure completely. Switch. You don't want clothing getting in the way when you are designing a complete artwork later on. You want to draw on a complete knowledge of the figure. So when you have somebody dressed, you want to be able to understand what's going on underneath. And there's actually in David's tennis court oath, I think, he has a preliminary sketch for it where all the guys starting the French Revolution are depicted naked as Greek sculptures, which is hilarious. But then he has fancy clothing on them in the more finished drawing that he worked up. But because we have these particular strategic undergarments today, we have opportunities for all kinds of expressive lines where they're stretching across or getting folded, and that's pretty neat too. The idea is to just always respond to what's in front of you. If you are getting an opportunity for expressive lines out of the situation that you're in, that's what the situation is offering you. Go with it. It's great. There's always something interesting to look at. Switch. I'm going to screw up her face again now. Faces are understood in a slightly different structure in the brain than the rest of the body. Because we are such highly social animals, we have dedicated... Can we finish this pose? Yeah. We have dedicated sensors in the brain for processing faces. That means that faces present a unique challenge to the artist because the process that the figurative artist goes through in undoing their programming for what they think they see and seeing directly what is in nature in front of them has to go through a second layer of decoding in processing the face, because you not only have your stereotypes of form that apply to all forms, you have stereotypes of form that are forcefully applied to your consciousness by the face processing sensor in your brain. So you have to fight against it often for a long, long time before you can do a decent portrait. This is not a portraiture video, so I'm not doing decent portraits. But it's a different subject. There's a reason that we work for a very long time to get good at drawing faces. It's almost a separate skill. And if that's a skill that interests you, I recommend distinct and specific study in it. All right, let's take a break. All right, so we did some short poses. We got to know our model a little bit. We got our energy up for doing a longer life drawing. And we're about to set the long pose. There are a few topics involved in working with a live model that I'd like to discuss with you now. As you know, I did gross anatomy many years ago, and it sounds silly, but I kind of thought that if you dissected a person enough, you would eventually figure out where the soul was. It was an intuitive idea. I wasn't conscious that I was thinking that. But as I was going through it, I realized that I was expecting to see more than a machine. And ultimately, I dissected the brain, and the brain is a fantastic labyrinth of structures, but it's also just a machine. So in a way, I left gross anatomy after 2 years, still searching for soul. And, you know, you're ultimately going to find soul by carefully working with a living person. We are not dealing with an object here. We are dealing with a human being, a living process, who changes over time. It's not a still life. It's not a thing. We have to understand the person as a still life and a thing, but we also have to understand the person as an active presence. And balancing that more subjective understanding against a more objective understanding of the person as a physical and visual phenomenon is part of the science and art of life drawing. So we are going to keep that very much in mind today as we work with Alyssa on this longer drawing. We're going to be doing a standing back pose. She's in a neutral state right now, and I'm going to adjust the pose until it's something that I want to spend a while drawing. So Alyssa, can you rotate your shoulders a little bit to the right? A little bit less? Okay, fantastic. You're naturally falling into left hip out, which is good. Can you accentuate that a little more? Is that something that you can hold? Can you experiment with putting your arms in front of you? Both? Right shoulder down a little bit. Left shoulder up a bit. Shoulders circled more forward a little. Okay. Try putting your right arm down. Rotate your shoulders left a bit. Hips slightly out less to the left. Rotate your shoulders right. Can you bring your right knee in a little more in front of your left knee? Like if you have to bring your foot forward a bit. Yeah, more like, yeah, okay, rotate your hips right. Okay. Stop. Both arms down. I think that's it. Is that holdable?
Yes.
And you'll remember it?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so this is going to be our pose. Now I'm going to point out a few differentiations of structures that you see based on superficial anatomy. And after that, we're going to get down to some drawing. So I'm going to go over to the model, and I'm going to point out a few things. Okay. Our fundamental structure types that we're looking at on a life model are, well, everything's covered in skin. Underneath the skin, you're going to have closer to the surface fat, bone, and muscle, and in a few cases, tendons. So what we have here is a ridge of muscle, and what we have here is a protrusion of bone. Up here, bone. Here, erector spinae muscles holding up her back. Here, more subcutaneous fat. The ways that I'm not an explicit anatomist. I've been exposed to a great deal of human anatomy, and I've looked at individual structures, but I'm not analytic about it. I know what I'm looking at, but I know what I'm looking at because of the evidence of the visual details that are right in front of me at any given time. So for instance, I know this is muscle because it's long and because it has a fairly focused highlight. That means that the structure around it turns quickly from one moment to the next, and that's characteristic right over here of muscle. This little pointy bit here I happen to know is where bone is pressing up against layers of muscle and fat underneath the skin. Bone will tend to give you little point highlights. Fat will give you a nice broad region of value that changes slowly because fat undulates slowly. We'll talk about the meaning and structure of cellulite later on when we're covering male and female anatomy. But what you want to do is observe all of these substructures as individual components contributing to the flow and superstructure of the entire human body. But you still have to learn how to appreciate each substructure individually. So I'm going to go back over there and I'm going to draw little samples of what each structural type looks like when you're attacking it with toned paper. So we're going to take a little bit of time to explore the visual qualities of the primary structures that we see in superficial anatomy, which are bone, muscle, and fat. The bones that we're going to be looking at here are the spinous processes. Those are the little dragon spikes that come off the back of the spine. So you'll see that they change fairly rapidly. When bones protrude up into the surface of the skin, they tend not to last. They produce ridges and spines and bumps that are very distinctive. You can tell that they are not part of the surrounding mass of softer tissue. They don't change. They're visible. Now she's standing up straighter, which means that the muscles on either side of her spine, which are holding her back up, protrude more. So they have some qualities in common with bone, which is that they tend to have very focused highlights. But those highlights aren't jagged the way that bone tends to be a little bit jagged. They're slightly broader. I've got the spine here, and then we've got that deep divot where the spine has receded into the flesh, but then we have this shiny region here where the muscle bulges up through the skin while it's supporting her back. And as you can see, the higher up you go, the broader that particular muscle gets and the softer the highlight gets as the form begins to turn less quickly and it becomes more diffuse. And this is characteristic of muscles. If you look up around her shoulders, you'll see lots of little muscles everywhere. And they all have this same set of characteristics. It's worth studying anatomy, but it's also worth becoming intuitively familiar with the aesthetic properties of different types of structure. Butts are good places to look for some fat because that's where it lives. So here we have all right, so this is a very loose drawing of her left butt cheek. I'm not going to shade it because it would take all day, but I'm going to jump to the fun part, which is putting white onto the paper, because one of the great things about toned paper is when you go with that white, you can very, very rapidly begin to define forms by how light bounces off of them. So as you can see, compared with the muscle and the bone, we have a broad, flatter region of value here. Now, I'm going to grab my eraser because I see got a very faint line here, and if I start mixing out the white, as I warned you, I'm going to get a nasty cold gray that I cannot erase. So, we have here the weird little tendon that connects the posterior superior iliac spine to the skin and gives you the dimples of Venus. And we have here a column of light where the form begins to curve around as the body turns from a fatty region into a region defined more by bone and muscle. So you see this highlight is much more focused than this broader highlight where the muscles wrap around the butt and then there's a layer of fat over that. So we have a broad, bright region here and a narrow, bright region here. There's always a bit of a conflict in the mind of a person drawing the figure between their analytic understanding of what's going on and their direct observation of what's in front of them. I tend to fall slightly more towards the direct observation end of the spectrum, as you would expect from my tendency to see things in terms of small shapes. But other people naturally see things more analytically. You'll have to figure out where you are and memorize an appropriate amount of anatomy. I've memorized very little anatomy because I understand that I'm looking for the aesthetics of different substructures, and then I'm looking for how those substructures exist in the individual person in front of me. The anatomy of people does have universal characteristics, but it is also surprisingly varied from person to person. So you want to remain open to that so that you're not drawing a generalized figure, unless that's your goal as an artist, which is perfectly legitimate, but it's a choice that you have to make. There are no wrong choices, but there are choices that you didn't make on purpose, and you want to make all of your choices on purpose if possible, because you're working with expressive media. If you're not expressing something, there's almost no point to doing it. Anyway, that's pretty much of a demonstration of how fat, muscle, and bone work, and we're going to move on to doing a fully developed life drawing. So we are going to begin the long pose now. With the first 20 minutes, what I recommend doing is figuring out what your composition is, because you're probably not going to draw the entire figure. So you've got to select what you want to do. And I'm also going to set a timer so that we're not making the model really miserable. And I'm going to take a look at the pose. This is a 15 by 11 inch sheet of paper. It's not enough to fit the entire figure unless I make the figure really small. And I really like to get into some detail and the meat of things. So that means that I don't have the option of doing everything. I'm going to start blocking in the big shapes. You're going to probably have a little bit of trouble seeing this on camera because I'm using the pencil very lightly so that I am not committing to these decisions. Don't worry about it. The image will get clearer and darker as I get farther along with the drawing. Left hip out a little bit. Great. Okay. So obviously what I'm focused on here is the center of the back. A good thing to find when you're doing a back is the spine. Everything is hanging off the spine. If you know where your spine is, you can build everything out from there. So I tend to start with outlines because, like I said, I see shapes. But I also sometimes override my native tendency so that, for instance, I get the spine in the middle of the back. I get the back wide enough relative to its height. You see here, I made this side a little bit narrow because I was just looking at the shape of the outline. This is why I start out light, because I'm going to need to fix it later. And while you can erase graphite on this paper, almost all papers will eventually respond to excessive erasure by starting to hash up their texture, and then your drawing is really screwed. So you want to minimize erasure even when you have the option to do it. So you see, starting to get the shape of the back. All artists also tend to have weaknesses. One weakness that I have is that I cannot find the shoulders. This means that when you go from like basically nipple to here, front or back, I tend to squish it a little bit. It comes out funky. And since our goal today is making a drawing that looks good, I'm not going to challenge myself. I'm going to do what I'm good at. So we're going to be doing the back and the butt and the hips because I know that I can do a good job with those, and I can show you the general principles without winding up with a really clunky drawing. Okay, so she's producing all kinds of graceful forms here. You can see her rib cage pushing out against the right side. You can see the flesh folding on the left. Those are all such exciting things to draw, and I'm really looking forward to the next part of what we're doing, which will be rendering. I like to get a pretty good sense of what my shapes are before. It's basically coloring things in. I outline them and then I color them in. Lots of artists don't work this way. It's completely legitimate to work in a number of other ways. For me, it's easiest if I get those big shapes, and then I can start to refine them as I get farther and farther into the drawing. I find this set of shapes extraordinarily elegant, so I just really like drawing it. You'll notice that over time, I'm going to be repeatedly saying to Alyssa to stick her left hip out. It goes contrary to what the body wants to do. The body wants to settle into the maximum degree of support. So every model that you work with, their body will be working against their mind to settle into a position that's well supported. So you will occasionally feel bad because you're going to be nagging them to do, like, get back into whatever slightly more dynamic pose you've designed, but it's just part of the, it goes with the territory, and it's not the end of the world. Right, Alyssa?
Yeah, okay. Very correct. And it's definitely not taken as nagging. It's a big part of the long poses is the mental challenge. And a lot of times to endure through a longer pose, you get into a hypnotic state. And what naturally happens with that is, like you said, your body begins to settle, and it happens so gradually that you're unaware it's happening. So then all of a sudden you'll notice, oh no, this pose is different. So to have the auditory reminder to kind of get back into the more engaged position is welcomed.
Okay, that's good to hear. Along those lines, torsion, where the body is twisted, the body will seek to untwist itself. So a great thing you can do in setting up a pose for a model that has torsion is to give them things to anchor their limbs against, because that will help them to distribute the stress of supporting themselves onto the limbs that are in a torqued position. So for instance, if you want to have a seated torqued pose, give them a back of the chair to hold on to. It helps them to have that hand on the chair like that. So even though their body is going to naturally go back like that over time, it does give you a longer window when they can maintain that torsion without trying to do it like this. Because if this is what's going to happen if you leave them like that. And that's not their fault. That's the human body saying, why am I doing this for a sustained period? I'm not designed to hold like that. As you can see, we're getting towards a blocked-in drawing. I'm going to curve her spine a little bit because I had it unduly straight. One natural bias of the mind is to straighten curved lines. So always evaluate any straight line that you find in a drawing of yours because it's usually wrong. I don't mean artistically wrong because that's your choice. I mean technically wrong because it doesn't exist in nature.
Going off of what you said with the, having something to anchor your limbs against, it's always wonderful as a model when there's, things to interact with, and not props, but just, chairs or a wall that you can be against, or, rods, because it does allow for you to you can almost settle into those uncomfortable positions because you have multiple areas of support. So it's a really awesome tool, I think, to have, is especially like a yardstick.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also from what I've heard, it's nice when you have that single straight line to sort of check you guys, and you just said, the straight lines aren't going to happen in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. Another thing that less tangible but worth keeping in mind, and not all models will volunteer it or even be aware of it, find something for them to look at. If the position of their head is important, put their eyes somewhere, because if you have the body here, the head here, and the eyes there, you will gradually have everything straighten out over time. If they're looking at a particular point, it helps them. So even though their head wants to drift here, they can feel their eyes losing the focus point. So agree with the model in advance when you have a torqued head position, what are they looking at? And then also when they come back from break, if you're doing a long pose, it makes it much easier for them to get their head into position. So again, what we're talking about here is life drawing. And life drawing is kind of an interesting area artistically because you don't necessarily go into it with a plan for what you want to get out of it. Your idea is you want to go and draw a person. It's different from saying, I want to do a painting of, St. George slaying the dragon or whatever. Got dragons on the mind today. You are responding to what the model brings to you. You might say, okay, I would like to do a standing pose today. I'd like to do a standing front pose, standing back pose. I have in mind to do something with an arm up. But you're still responding to a lot of what the model brings to you. And so you're responding compositionally. You're responding in terms of like what you emphasize and de-emphasize in the depiction. So for instance, I've never met Alyssa before, but Alyssa's got a whole bunch of definition in the structures around her shoulders. So I'm responding to that, and that's going to play a larger role in this drawing than it would have in somebody who didn't have that definition. I forget where I was going with that. Anyway, just stay aware of what you're doing. Keep on asking yourself why you're making choices, and you'll wind up with a lively drawing. I'm very interested in life drawings being lively. I am somewhat less interested in life drawings being accurate. I feel like an undue preoccupation with accuracy harkens back to the still life, and I'm sure that's kind of insulting to still life people, because still life people have a different discipline. Their discipline is finding the soul in objects, and that is a profound discipline. Be that as it may, something that is not physically moving presents an opportunity for the pursuit of accuracy that does not exist in life drawing and that you shouldn't be seeking in life drawing. In life drawing, you want to have a sense of motion, animation, liveliness. So respond to those things. Don't get all worked up because you can't see the same thing twice. If the model's toe moved, roll with it. It drives models crazy when people in a class are like, your toe was different before. So just adjust to it. It becomes easier the more you do it. And when I say becomes easier, I mean over the course of years. But it does become easier. Anticipate that changing in your work over time. You'll become looser. So there are choices that I'm going to have to make here. I can see Alyssa's ribs when she breathes in a way that I can't see them when she breathes out. So I'm going to be choosing in this drawing whether she's inhaling or exhaling. That's a very dynamic scenario, and it means that sometimes I'll have to wait before I draw a particular structure until she's at the right state of breath. But it's a huge privilege to be in a situation where you're responding to the breath of your subject. That's amazing, and it's worth keeping in mind. As you can see, I'm starting to block in large shadows and so on. I will also be tending to draw from right to left because I'm left-handed and I don't want to smear my drawing. But because I have such a long pencil, I can get all the way to the right side of this drawing without smearing the left side of the drawing, which is fortunate. But I still have developed a habit over the years of drawing from right to left to minimize smearing. If you're right-handed, left to right may be a good idea for you. And I'm going to hold off on the white is like dessert. Using white on this paper is just delightful. You get amazing results very, very quickly. So I want to make sure that I have everything in the rightest place that I'm going to put it before I start putting in the whites. So I'm going to be doing all the darks first. And as you can see, it's starting to show up more clearly on the camera because the more I refine the drawing, the more I am allowing myself to get darker with the values until I get towards the ultimate maximum contrast range that I'm going to be trying to get with this drawing. So, like that. Okay, what I'm drawing here, this is interesting. You see there's a bulge here and a bulge here, a bulge here and a bulge here. They're very characteristic on women, less so on men. This is where the iliac crest of the pelvis, the upper ridge of the pelvis, is pushing out against the skin. And because the pelvis is wider in women, it also moves the femur outward. So this is the pointy outy bit on the outside of the femur, which is, I think, the greater trochanter. And that protrudes outward, producing the second bulge on women's hips. And then there's a greater angle of the femur inward towards the knee in women than there is in men because the top of the femur is forced outward by the hips. So we'll see that more explicitly later in the video when we're comparing Alyssa and our male model, Demetrius. But we're seeing it here. Part of what we read as the extreme gracefulness of the outline of a woman's back is the broadening of the rib cage, the in-curve of the waist, and then those two bulges from the pelvis and the femur. If you look at early versions of, I think, the Apple Newton, which was their failed handheld device, it's quite explicitly the outline of a woman's back. Super elegant device, but nobody really understood handwriting recognition software yet, and it didn't work out for them. But it was really pretty. I'm marking in here where certain structures are that I'm going to come back to later on. I don't necessarily need to do that, but it's like my safety blanket. I wind up erasing half this stuff anyway. But I just want to make sure that I know where I am and where everything else is. I do this in paintings as well. Paint right over it. So you see now I'm really committing to that outline because I've been drawing it for a while and I know where I made mistakes before. I'm ready to say, this is what I'm putting on the paper. This process of refinement will go on for a while, and it will invisibly segue into the final rendering of the overall drawing. But remember, if you're a form person, you may start from a big mass and work outward. I work from the outside in. You may work from the inside out. You may work from dynamic lines of tension, and that's how you hang your entire anatomy off those lines of tension. It's not how I work, but it's a legitimate way to work. There's no wrong way to work. You just have to figure out what works for you. Something that I'm doing here is I'm being very careful about this cast shadow outline, because the cast shadow would naturally tend to fall into a straightish line, but it's not only interacting with the protrusion of the buttock that's casting the shadow, it's also falling over the irregular surface of the leg that the shadow is being cast onto. And if you can get that character of the edge of a cast shadow really well, it tells the eye a ton about the object that's being depicted. So you want to pay attention to that. So you'll see it more clearly later on when I do the white here, but this plane here tilts up. So the shadow goes rapidly across it. We'll continue for just 1 second. This plane here goes in, so the cast shadow slows down in its progression across the back of the leg. Then this plane here tilts up again, and the cast shadow speeds back up on its way over to the inside edge of the leg. So that's been 20 minutes. We're going to take a little break because you need to give your models a break, and we're going to continue with the rendering of the drawing in a second.
Hey, would you like to win a beautiful painting worth almost $3,000? We've got a beautiful Joe McGurl plein air study that he's done of the sunset in Maine. It's gorgeous. If you want to have an opportunity to win it, go to paintinggiveaway.com. Just put in your email. That's all you've got to do, and you only need to enter once. We'll be giving away the prize at the end of May. Go to paintinggiveaway.com.
If it rings true that you have a dread of struggling with technical aspects of anatomy, all those complicated bones and muscles, we have a solution. Daniel Maidman can set you free as he shows you how to respect a knowledge of anatomy and then set it aside so you can communicate sympathy for the figure as a living, breathing individual.
This video is a walkthrough of the uses of the media that I use, which are toned paper with light and dark pencils. And we see them applied to short poses and especially to the development of an involved drawing over the course of a long pose with male and female models. I'm self-taught, so I have a strange mix of things that I've picked up over time, and I really like the results that I get. So if a student is interested in life drawing in general, but particularly in the way that I have developed my own system of life drawing, this will give a very clear insight into how I'm doing what I'm doing.
At all levels of your artistic journey, good drawing is the foundation for creating beautiful figurative drawings and paintings, regardless of style or medium.
Top thing is how to plan out and execute a long pose life drawing on toned paper. After that, I think the qualities of this particular set of media, how to do a certain amount of self-analysis to figure out how you're seeing what you're seeing, and how to override what your brain is telling you that is not necessarily helpful for your work. Next would be how to relate to a model, how to draw a model as a living person, and how to channel an experience of the model as a living person and not a still life object into your drawing. And finally, a few thoughts on how to transform the raw experience of perception into artistic inspiration.
This is your chance to enhance your art by infusing master touches with artful authority and new dimensions of clarity.
I'm hoping that it will have something to offer people at all stages of their development. So for an absolute beginner, they would get to see what the process is like. And I hope that, I really believe in the way that I draw people, the way that I interact with them as people, and also the way that I am drawing them as life drawing subjects.
What Daniel has discovered in his life drawing quest is available to you too. Beyond the knowledge you gain from this video, Daniel has a single secret word of advice: practice. In his case, it has paid off amazingly. With this video, Enhanced Life Drawing, you can count yourself among the fortunate to have learned from a modern-day master, such as Daniel Maidman. Available on DVD or digital to view on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. Order Enhanced Life Drawing with Daniel Maidman today.
Well, that's Daniel Maidman from the video Enhanced Life Drawing, and you can learn more about that at lilyartvideo.com. Now let's have an interview with Daniel.
Hi there, my name is Jennifer Balkin, and I'm from Fine Art Connoisseur, and I'm here today with Daniel Maidman. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Jennifer.
I'm really happy to be here with you today. This is pretty exciting to get to interview another artist.
I'm really glad to finally meet you in person.
Yeah. All right, and I hear you had a great day yesterday demoing.
It was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I have some questions for you today.
Sounds good.
How old were you when you started drawing?
I am aware of having been drawing around the age of 3. I think it probably started a little earlier than that, but there are photographs of me drawing at that age, and I have a few drawings left over from then.
Oh, so that's fun.
I think my whole life is probably the answer.
Mm.
Yeah.
Were you influenced by a parent, or was there somebody in your life that showed you a little bit about drawing?
My mom's an artist, and so She was an active artist up until I was about 10 years old, and then she had to take a long hiatus as an executive in order to help support the family. And she's recently retired and gone back to full-time art. So,
that's so nice.
I'm really happy for her.
Full circle. So how would you describe your style of drawing?
I have this friend, Erica Johnson, who is a wonderful artist, and when I showed her the anatomical drawings that I was doing, she said, I like these more than I like other anatomical drawings because even though they're very crisp and scientific, they're lyrical. So I guess what I would hope for in my drawings is maybe lyrical realism. So something that's recognizably the real thing, but with some sense of the poetic or the graceful about it.
I love that because it's there's life in it. It's not. I mean, I think there are a lot of good technicians out there, but they lack. Well, lyrical. That's a beautiful word to describe it. It lacks life and something dynamic in it. So yeah, and that's what I'm drawn to in your drawings. How would you define, I mean, this might be related to what you just said, but how would you define your aesthetic? What do you think makes you different from other artists?
It's interesting. I am envious of almost everyone that I know who's good at what they do. And it doesn't have to be something that I do at all. I'm envious of your color patches. I'm envious of those technicians for their incredible ability to just nail shape and value. I really like a lot of the sort of like impressionist stuff that we're seeing from people like Martin Campos and Gage Oakdenbrow. But I can only be me, and what I'm recognizing over time is that there's a certain mix, I guess, of technical facility with hopefully retaining a sense of life. So I'm willing to sacrifice accuracy in the interests of vitality. And that balance is my balance. So even I can recognize my own work at this point. And for a long time I couldn't. I felt like it was just more life drawing, but now I'm like, oh, this one's me.
You found your voice, which is what we all aspire to do. So bravo. So Daniel, I understand that you went through a course, an independent study in gross anatomy at Santa Monica College and completed an anatomical atlas in 2003. That's really amazing. And the illustrations were used in the U.S. Army's Forensic Field Guide. And what was that called again?
It was a forensic field guide for deceased personnel, something like that. What it was they have a special unit in the Army, or they did at that time. I don't know if they still do, or how it's structured now. They had a special unit in the Army that would go out and do evaluations after battles of how people died and learn from their successes and errors. So they weren't doctors, they were soldiers who were trained in preliminary forensic field analysis. And there was a professor at Santa Monica College where I was studying who was friends with the forensic scientist who was in charge of that program. So she was looking around for anatomical illustrations for her work, and he put her in touch with me, and she selected a few of my bone drawings for use in that manual. So I was very proud of that.
Oh, I'm sure. That must have really made a difference in the direction you took after that.
Well, though I got into anatomical dissection because I was having trouble drawing backs in life drawing. And I knew how Da Vinci and Michelangelo learned. So I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I called UCLA and I asked if I could attend gross anatomy, and they said no, but you might try Santa Monica College because they have a couple cadavers every semester. So I got in touch with Santa Monica College because the course description said with applications in medicine, this, that, the other, and the arts. And they had a faculty meeting to decide whether they were actually going to let me attend it as an artist. And fortunately, they said yes. So I took a unit under Dr. Margarita Dell, who was amazing. And it was a 6-month class, but I stuck around for 2 years. And they just gave me basically unlimited access to the cold room. I wasn't cutting up any structures that the students hadn't finished with. So I would attend along with the students. They would do their dissections. I would draw. And then I would spend hours there afterwards continuing drawing. And the way it changed my life was that it really gave me an insight into the interior structure of the body so that I could understand the surface anatomy that I was seeing in life drawing.
That is, that's amazing. I mean, I can see how rich a experience that would be, and that makes so much sense in looking at your drawings, because I can feel what's underneath the skin, and so that's pretty extraordinary.
Thank you.
So a lot of your drawing, Danielle, is focused on just sections of the human form, creating a more anonymous lens for the viewer. Can you talk about this for a little bit?
Yeah, it started out mainly as a practical consideration. There were two big reasons for doing it. One of them was to develop a drawing to the degree of rendering finish that I prefer. Takes a while. So when you're in a life drawing workshop and you've got a 20-minute pose or a 40-minute pose, you can't do what I want to do to the whole figure. And you can't fit it on the piece of paper that's practical to use. And at the very beginning of my work as an artist, I couldn't make the whole figure work. And to some extent, that's still an issue for me. I get less practice rendering the whole figure, so I have to put extra effort into getting an entire figure to work. But over time, I developed a habit and an aesthetic around how much I could draw in 20 minutes, how much I could draw in 40 minutes or 60 minutes. And so that's kind of turned into the idiom in which I draw.
And so, so when you sit down to do a drawing, say in a life drawing session, an open studio format, will you sort of hone in on the part of that figure that's like really beautiful to you, or there's something there that you see, like I think I'm going to capture that person's I don't know, femur today, or you know, so how do you make that decision?
I take a few seconds at the beginning to look over the entire pose, and then I figure out like not only the part that's the most interesting, but also the part that I could compose nicely on the paper. Like I've got this generally a vertical rectangular format, and that permits certain compositions and it discourages other compositions. So I'll figure out what would work among the things that are interesting in that pose, and then I'll start working on that.
So I look at your drawings and your paintings as bodyscapes in a way. Much like a landscape, I can lose myself in the twists and turns and the topography of them. I imagine that when you're painting and drawing a person, a figure, there's a personal aspect for you in there. Beyond what are you thinking about when you're really getting almost past, because I'm thinking about it as I talk, I'm thinking about my own work. You're perhaps getting past that individual and then just going beyond to a certain place. So what is that like for you in terms of the scape of the body?
Well, it depends on, I guess, my state of mind. So there's sort of a preliminary process where you're really processing hard, trying to figure out what you're seeing, how you're seeing it, get some notes down on the page, and your whole mind is occupied with that process of simply translating observation into expression. And then you have a long middle part where your mind can wander. And I could be thinking about anything. I have like a very bicameral brain. My verbal brain is completely independent from my visual brain. So I'll often be thinking about writing or whatever I'm writing about. But then there's also, when it's really going well, there's, I'm sure you know the sort of flow state where you feel emptied out, like you're not there anymore. You're simply there to celebrate some glorious thing that has made you the tool of it. And that's really the best time when you're transported by just how magnificent the body is and how spectacular it is that you can see and draw. So like that.
I like those words. It's very present. Like there's not. You're just completely in that moment. Here's a question that we get asked a lot. What do you find most difficult about drawing the figure?
Oh my God. The right number of vertebrae. That's really hard. Also, if you've got like somebody who's bent over a little bit and you can see all their ribs, you got from here to here to fit X number of ribs in, and spacing them properly so they don't all crowd up on one side that's tough. It never gets easier for me.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. What do you love most about drawing the figure?
When you start to get a sense of the real presence of form, and this took me a long time. I used to shade all my brights to the same degree of brightness across a figure, top to bottom, and all my darks to the same degree of dark across a figure, top to bottom. Once I learned to coordinate brights and darks over the entire composition, so that I would choose where my brightest brights were going to be, and even if there was something bright somewhere else, I wasn't going to do it. Then it started to really push the figure out of the page and give us a sense of a living presence with us in that drawing. I think that's my favorite part. Like, if that happens, I'm very excited about it.
So, I mean, that happens as your level of artistry has risen.
That's only the past maybe 5 or 6 years that I've been able to do that. Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
It sounds, I mean, it's much less formulaic, you know, it's basically responding to what you see at that moment and how to best describe it. So this is probably related, but do you think your work has changed much over the last several years or since you began?
Yes. Well, I mean, I couldn't draw at all when I began. I obviously, I think I had genetic potential to get better at drawing, but it wasn't developed, so the drawings were not good. Then there was a period where I could draw, but it was a technical facility, but I had the flatness and an over-reliance on, or at least what looks to my eye now like an over-reliance on sharply defined lines in the shading and the outlines. My lines are much softer now. And that's a matter of becoming familiar enough with the model, with the media, and with myself to be able to start to let things go. And I think that letting go of sharply defining every little thing has made the drawings much more expressive. So that's a gradual shift from that hardness to softness over the past 10 years. And also I have like way fewer catastrophes, like where you like get halfway through a drawing, you're like, this is terrible. Like, I need to throw this out and make sure no one ever sees it. That doesn't happen as much anymore.
Tell me how you find your ideal subject.
Okay, so I mean, obviously the territory that we're talking about is drawing people. And I have like certain, you know, body types that I tend to prefer, but almost invariably what'll happen is I'll just encounter a model who, for whatever reason, I do better work with them. And then I'll just want to keep making art for a long time. So I tend to, over time, develop really long-lasting, sustained relationships with models. The model who was in my first solo show, Leah, I worked with her every week for about 10 years. And we made a ton of paintings and drawings together. I got to know who she was as a person, and that informed the work that I was making. And it just happened to be a sympathetic relationship that worked out. And that happens once in a while. And there are a lot of models that I can do good work with, but every once in a while I'll run into a model where I say, I need to become a better artist to do work with you. And it's really exciting to start down that path.
So I like that idea of finding new challenges for yourself, working with different people.
Yeah.
Some artists describe their human subjects as portraits, or their drawings or paintings of human subjects as portraits. Do you do portraits? Would you call them that or something different?
I mean, I don't feel any need to revise the standard understanding of the term portrait. I mean, to me that means a face. And I do faces sometimes. I do torsos a lot. I like to do hands. I feel like hands are as close to a portrait as you can get when you're not doing the face. And I love doing hands. And I do some portraits.
So what is your practice like in your studio? What does a typical day for Daniel Maidman look like?
Well, I need to cancel internet service in my studio because I get in there and then I just screw around on the web for like half an hour before I can settle down and do some work.
I can relate.
Right? Yeah. But then I'll have whatever in the studio, I'm mostly painting. So if I have a model there, I'll be drawing. And if I have a model there, I'll tend to arrive like 5 minutes before the model does and set up quickly and then draw, and then I've got to go do something else. If I'm painting, I'll have this long settling in process that involves checking email and social media and wasting time and looking out the window and looking at other paintings, setting up the paints, and then going to the bodega and getting a snack, and then I'll come back and I'll finally start painting, and then I'll paint for 4 or 5 hours. And when I have to go, or when I get to challenges where I'm thinking of taking a shortcut, I know it's time to stop. Because you want to put everything into everything for a painting. Mm-hmm. So when I hit that point, I'll go home. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How far away is your studio from your home?
It's a 20-minute walk.
Oh,
yeah.
God, that's
so
wonderful.
I chose it in order to walk there.
Yeah. And is there something that you do or listen to or consume or that helps fuel you for a day of working?
I mostly listen to podcasts on unrelated subjects. Mm-hmm. So for the past long while, I've been listening to, I've been listening to Mike Duncan's podcasts. So I listened to his entire 180-part history of Rome, which is fantastic. Mm. And then he started probably 6 or 7 years ago doing a history of revolutions, starting with the English Civil War. So I'm up to the Mexican Revolution, and that's January of this year, and I am in trouble once I run out of Mike Duncan podcasts.
Well, I will have to check him out.
Oh, he's great. He's really funny, very engaging. And so that's what I've been listening to for like the past year. Mm-hmm. I'm actually halfway through a history of philosophy that's on YouTube, and I got to Spinoza, and I was like, I'm having trouble painting and following this. So I'll get back to that at some point too.
I love knowing what other artists are taking in while
and Suggested Donation podcast and John Dalton and all like the really good art podcasts are great to listen to.
I know that you teach. Mm-hmm. How long have you been teaching for?
I think I've been doing it for maybe a couple years. People kept on asking me when I was going to teach, and I just took no initiative until pretty much Rob Zeller at Teaching Studios in Oyster Bay invited me to come teach a workshop. And it went really well. I had a great time. So I've done a few more of them since then, and I'm expecting to do more of them in the future. I really enjoy it.
I guess the first question is, what do you think your students get out of an experience and having you as a teacher?
Well, I think that this is in no way flattering. I think that it's a great form. It's like having a trainer. Like having a trainer makes you go to the gym because you owe them showing up. So if you were going to show up anyway, you paid for it. If you were going to show up anyway, you could get most of that benefit without the trainer. But paying for the trainer makes you show up. And I think workshops, in a way, allow people to cordon off some time and say, I'm going to make some art in whatever region of art making that they're interested in. So if you go to one of my workshops, you're definitely spending a day or two life drawing, and you might not do that on your own. That said, I hope that my critiques and instructions are helpful. So, yeah.
Yeah. And what about what you gain from the teaching experience?
So I am very anxious not to impose how I draw on other people. And I know that sometimes some people would like to draw like me. But I think that that's an impulse you should get past as you develop as an artist, and that your ultimate goal should be to figure out who you are. So my goal with my students is not to say, here's how you do it, this is right, this is wrong, but to go around and say, okay, I see how you're drawing, and that helps me see how you see, and let's figure out how to get you farther along with that. And being forced repeatedly over the course of a day to ask myself, what am I seeing? What does this tell me about how this person sees? What does that tell me about the skills they're going to have and not have? And how can we build on those skills to improve their drawing? Helps to break down the process of art making in a way that comes back and benefits me. It lets me step back from myself and say, what are my choices here? What possibilities that I'm not following up on are available, and would I like to maybe change how I'm working in order to take advantage of other potentialities hidden in art making itself?
I've found, since I've been teaching as well, that is definitely, and there's an exchange there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a beautiful thing. That when you, as the teacher, learn so much from that experience and that give and take from working with somebody. So it's
And you teach quite a lot, right?
a fair amount.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So no, I always walk away from a teaching experience having like really gained something that I never foresaw. So it's a neat thing to be able to do. So what kind of artwork inspires you most? And are there any particular artists, living or dead, living or dead, that you've really found inspiration from?
I'm going to stick with dead artists on that because I am friends with hundreds of living artists. And if I say even one person's name, somebody else who I should also be mentioning will be like, but yeah. But that said, I adore being part of a vibrant community of artists who are all showing each other work and talking about work. And I think that's really exciting. And I think that the internet has really helped us that way. We used to be alone, and now we're able to see what other people are doing and draw inspiration from it, and it's really exciting. As far as dead artists go, it's always been kind of the same. Da Vinci, Titian, Michelangelo, Bernini, to some extent Sargent, Velázquez. I mean, nobody surprising. Like these are all tremendous painters. Mm-hmm. But I really, for some reason, I have like a lot of a sort of a subjective sympathy with Titian that exceeds like any reasonable role he should play. He just speaks to me. So.
I know you, Daniel, you write about art, and so are very sensitive to the symbolism, the meaning, the drive behind someone's work, getting it, being able to write about a particular artist and talk to them. Do you find that this informs your own work?
It does, and it's a lot like the case of the students. It alerts me to other possible paths, and even if they're not paths that I ultimately want to go down myself, it reminds me that there are many more choices available than the choices that I'm making. And no one can make all the choices, but you want to keep on being aware of other choices, just to remember how enormous the potential of art is. And sometimes the past few years I'll see artists doing really ambitious things, and that has guided me towards being more ambitious with my own work. So the work doesn't wind up looking like the work that I'm looking at, but the degree of ambition that I'm seeing on the part of those artists reminds me that I can try to do more with the tools that I use. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. And somewhat related to that, and also related to something that we talked about earlier, was the involvement in social media, mm-hmm. Which is something that many of us artists find ourselves in, and can be overwhelming at times, but also incredibly rewarding in just seeing so much work. And I know you're active in social media. Do you find that this other medium, influences you in some way?
It's a mixed blessing.
Mm-hmm.
I love knowing other artists, but I also dislike the implicit pressure, especially that Instagram brings to bear, to keep on doing what you're already doing. Because you will tend to attract an audience that likes what you do, and if you start doing something different, you can tell that your audience doesn't like that. And that's difficult. You have to actively fight against it. On the other hand, and also Instagram management's a nightmare, but Instagram has completely broken down the fortifications around the art world. It's no longer possible for art institutions to claim that there's no such thing as figurative painting anymore. It's no longer possible for them to monopolize the collector pool. All of those things have escaped from the control of galleries. It's actively undermining the ability of mid-range galleries to even exist. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I like a lot of those galleries, but as a system, I think it's been tremendously flawed. And I really hope that it eventually takes down the big galleries. But, I mean, that's pretty far afield from the question, and there are economic reasons that I think the big galleries will actually survive. But social media has really changed things, and it's a mixed bag. I think it's a net positive, though.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
I definitely get inspiration from seeing the work of other artists a lot. I get sick of myself, though.
Yeah, and we, we're sitting here right now, you and me, because of social media.
Yeah.
So, just being able to connect to all these people in their little caves is a wonderful thing.
It's really nice.
What do you hope a viewer takes away from your work?
Well, okay, I'll tell you what I take away. When I see some art that really moves me, it's like it sanctifies the whole world. So it's such an illuminating way of seeing that it sticks with me for a while, and it makes everything else that I look at better. I can see better and I can appreciate better. And so if the viewer gets that from my work, that would be really nice.
And that just like, that answer makes me, that's an answer to why art is important as something that we should all consume in our culture. So I like that.
Thank you. We forget that things are really beautiful, and like it's easy for the world to seem ugly or meaningless. And finding meaning and beauty everywhere it's a skill, and art can help train you in that skill.
What do you think is the most important thing, or one of the most important things, in drawing and or painting that you've learned in the last 10 years? I guess just a follow-up little explanation to that, maybe for something that you can bestow upon others that you have found in the last 10 years of your work that would be important for somebody who is wanting to draw or paint.
Oh yeah, sure. Practice. If you want to either get good technically or get to the point where your own style presents itself to you, like there are a few people who are super lucky. Egon Schiele and Henri Matisse are super lucky because they have a unique style that comes out immediately before they even know what they're doing. For most people, style is not something you can pursue. It's the outcome of refining and refining and refining your work until it begins to achieve an expression that's unique to its own nature. So apart from developing skills, developing as an artist requires practice. There are lots of techniques that you can learn, but there are no secrets. All of the techniques are easily found if you're looking, like in this DVD. But you have to follow through on them, and that's just a matter of putting in the hours. So in the past 10 years, I've started to see what putting in those hours yields, and that's very exciting. And I think that anyone can access that if they care enough about it.
So what are you working on now?
I'm working on a bunch of large paintings for a solo show that I have probably in the past by the time this is being watched. But these are kind of a new thing for me. I was doing one of my figurative paintings with an experimental palette of titanium white and Portland warm gray. And I absolutely loved this like very narrow range of values that were kind of warm, and you could get brights and sort of half dims. It felt a lot like my drawings. And I was like, this is such a miraculous palette that I could see doing things that aren't the figure. And so I started developing a bunch of paintings where they involve landscapes and backgrounds and trees.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Daniel's doing something other than the figure.
Yeah. And I'm really excited about those. Like they're much more narrative than anything I've ever tackled before. They address emotions in a more direct way than I usually do. And I'm excited to show those to people. And I'm excited to keep on painting them. I'm not going to finish with this in time for this show, so I think there will probably be a second show a few years down the road.
So this is an exciting, different direction.
Yeah. And actually, I'm going to be building on some of the stuff that is coming into my head from listening to podcasts. He has a long section on the failed revolutions of 1848 in this Revolutions podcast cycle, and it put me in mind of how revolutions start and then don't succeed. And I'd like to do a cycle of paintings depicting a failed revolution somewhere in Middle Europe. So I've been, over the past few years, I'll collect news photographs that really strike me, and I realized that I could rearrange elements of those into a narrative. So there will be a series of narrative paintings of the beginning, middle, and end of something that didn't work out in the worst possible way.
Wow.
So that's what I'm kind of hoping to do over the next 2 or 3 years.
That sounds really different and exciting for you, and creating new challenges for yourself, which is, I think, something like really, really important for artists to keep growing.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And lastly, I don't know if it's so much a question for you, but I read a piece that you wrote entitled "Do It Wrong, Do It Wondrously Wrong" online for medium.org. And I just love what I read in that piece. Just to quote some of your words for our audience here. You wrote, "But I also want you to know that in art there is no wrong. Everything comes down to a choice." And I think, and you had this conversation with a student who was doing something, I suppose, technically wrong, and you didn't want to intervene too much as to take some of his potential voice away from what I was understanding on that.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks a lot to the idea that we can become masterful in our technique, but as far as finding a voice and something that's you, what makes you, what makes Daniel, that's something more than technique. So I just found that really powerful, and we've talked about that in the last 45 minutes or so. So thank you for the interview and for enabling me to learn more about you. So
thank you so much for coming in today and for putting all that time into researching me and coming up with these great questions. It is such a pleasure.
Indeed. Thanks, Daniel.
Daniel's a very smart man and a very good teacher and a great person to teach you life drawing. That's from his video, Enhanced Life Drawing with Daniel Maidman. You can learn more about that at lilyartvideo.com. Thanks again for watching. I'm Eric Rhodes.
If it rings true that you have a dread of struggling with technical aspects of anatomy, all those complicated bones and muscles, we have a solution. Daniel Maidman can set you free as he shows you how to respect the knowledge of anatomy and then set it aside so you can communicate sympathy for the figure as a living, breathing individual.
This video is a walkthrough of the uses of the media that I use, which are toned paper with light and dark pencils, and we see them applied to short poses and especially to the development of an involved drawing over the course of a long pose with male and female models. I'm self-taught, so I have a strange mix of things that I've picked up over time, and I really like the results that I get. So if a student is interested in life drawing in general, but particularly in the way that I have developed my own system of life drawing, this will give a very clear insight into how I'm doing what I'm doing.
At all levels of your artistic journey, good drawing is the foundation for creating beautiful figurative drawings and paintings, regardless of style or medium.
Top thing is how to plan out and execute a long pose life drawing on toned paper. After that, I think the qualities of this particular set of media how to do a certain amount of self-analysis to figure out how you're seeing what you're seeing and how to override what your brain is telling you that is not necessarily helpful for your work. Next would be how to relate to a model, how to draw a model as a living person, and how to channel an experience of the model as a living person and not a still life object into your drawing. And finally, a few thoughts on how to transform the raw experience of perception into artistic inspiration.
This is your chance to enhance your art by infusing master touches with artful authority and new dimensions of clarity.
I'm hoping that it will have something to offer people at all stages of their development. So for an absolute beginner, they would get to see what the process is like. And I hope that I really believe in the way that I draw people, the way that I interact with them as people, and also the way that I am drawing them as life-drawing subjects.
What Daniel has discovered in his life-drawing quest is available to you too. Beyond the knowledge you gain from this video, Daniel has a single secret word of advice: practice. In his case, it has paid off amazingly. With this video, Enhanced Life Drawing, you can count yourself among the fortunate to have learned from a modern-day master, such as Daniel Maidman. Available on DVD or digital to view on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. Order Enhanced Life Drawing with Daniel Maidman today.